Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I wish all of you well, wherever you are in the world. I'm Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and welcome to Carnegie Connects, a series of virtual conversations on issues of critical importance to America and to the world. Today, I'm pleased and honored to welcome to the program Ami Ayalon and Efraim Halevy. I cannot imagine a discussion that's more timely, or I can't imagine two individuals more equipped to have it. I've known each of them for many years. I've admired their analysis and their judgment, but even more important is their sense of integrity, clarity, and honesty, which I think these days, in providing advice to governments wherever they are, coping with the problems that they have, critically important. Without good analysis, you really can't have or even hope to have the prospects of policies that succeed. I'll briefly introduce them. I'm not doing justice to their long and distinguished careers, but in the interest of time. Efraim Halevy studied law at the Hebrew University and joined the Mossad in 1961. Of his 40 years, almost 40 years in Mossad, he was a member of the director of the Mossad for 28 years and served as deputy head for 5. Leaving in 1995 to become Israel's ambassador to the European Union from 1996 to 1998. In that year, he was appointed the 9th head of Mossad and served under 3 Israeli prime ministers, Benjamin Netanyahu, Ehud Barak, and Ariel Sharon, until 2002. His 2006 memoir, Man in the Shadows, is well worth a read. Ami Ayalon, Admiral retired, is a former director of the Israeli security agency, the Shin Bet, and a former commander of Israel's Navy. He has served as a cabinet minister and as member of the Knesset. Along with Sari Nusseibeh, he has headed the People's Voice Peace Initiative in 2002. Ami Ayalon holds a BA in economics and political science from Bar Ilan, is a graduate of the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, holds an MA in public administration from Harvard, and an MA in law from Bar Ilan University in 2010. Ami, welcome to Carnegie Connects. Efraim, welcome. I want to cover 3 or 4 issues in the 45 minutes that we have. But let me start with the first obvious question, both of you, and that is October 7. Simply, what went wrong? Was this a failure of imagination, a failure to identify the dots and connect them, a result of bureaucratic and structural impediments in the Israeli intelligence community? What do you think actually occurred? I mean, let me start with you.
With me?
With you.
Well, I think that in order to understand what happened to us on the 7th of October, we have to try to understand, in a way, 3 misleading paradigms that led us to this disaster. And the first and probably most important is the political paradigm. The political paradigm was that since we cannot solve the conflict between us and Palestinians, all what we did failed. So the only way to do it now is managing the conflict. So the policy was managing the conflict and not to try to solve it. And in order to do it, we had to do something which we call divide and rule, meaning we have to make sure that Palestinians will not have a unified leadership, to make sure that we shall always be able to say that nobody to talk with, nothing to talk about. And in order to do it, we had to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority, supported by Fatah, will go on leading Palestinians in the West Bank, and they will create a conflict. They will, in a way, almost fight each other. And in order to do it, we had to do all what we did. Enhancing or assisting Hamas, transferring money, enabling people to work in Israel, etc., etc. And probably without our intention, we found ourselves strengthening Hamas and weakening Palestinian Authority. Once we did it, and what we saw on the Palestinian street, that Hamas is getting support, Palestinian support, because they became the only group or administration in the eyes of the Palestinians who fought against the Israeli occupation and in order to achieve Palestinian freedom. So on the other hand, Fatah and Palestinian Authority were perceived by Israeli collaborators because until today, they refuse formally to use violence. And although they are very weak, they still are trying from time to time to fight Palestinian terror, especially in Jenin, Nablus, wherever they can. They cannot do much because, as I said, today, and this is a great change, big change from the 90s, between 70 to 80% of the Palestinians are supporting Hamas only because Hamas is perceived as the one who fight for its freedom. This paradigm led us to a kind of intelligence paradigm or understanding that that Hamas is the third. Now, why Hamas is the third? By the way I understand it, in order to agree or to accept this assumption, it makes sure that you do not understand and you do not know what is Hamas all about. Because the way I see it, we Israelis are measuring hardware and they measure software, meaning what we measure after every round of violence or a military campaign, we measure their losses in human life, in military installations and in military infrastructure. And on the other hand, what they measure the support of the people, the support of the Palestinian street. Now, this assumption that Hamas is the third was based on the idea that yes, on the May 21, they suffered a huge loss and a huge military defeat. But on the other hand, we did not read the Halil Shkaki polls. And Halil Shkaki polls showed us a horrible picture in which it was the first time in which Hamas got more than 50% of the support of the Palestinian people, when Abu Mazen became between 20 to 25% of the Palestinians. So after every round of violence, after every military campaign, we say, okay, from now on, they are deterred for several years, and they understand it as a huge victory. And in addition, they need a military campaign every 1 or 2 years, because since they cannot deliver a better future, a better economy, and a better life for their people, so after 5, 6, 12 months, they are losing the support of the street. So they need another, and we do not understand it. So, and the last misleading paradigms was the result of what I said, the military assumption based on the wrong assumption that they are the third. So the military assumption, okay, they will not use military violence, they will not attack on the front with Gaza, they will do whatever they can in the West Bank, because they have many branches everywhere in the middle, in the West Bank, in Jenin, in Nablus, even in Hebron. So they will try to create a kind of a violent front on the West Bank. And since, of course, always when there is some clashes we have to be prepared against Hezbollah. We don't know when they will participate and when not. So all our military units were sent to the West Bank to defend settlers and to make sure that the Palestinian violence will not be expanded. And we send many units to the north. And our front with Gaza was empty.
Mm. So the political paradigm created both the intelligence and the operational failures. Is what you're
Dripping
saying.
down in a way. All Shin Bet directors thought that it is totally wrong policy, and all the directors of the Shin Bet insisted when they met Prime Minister that Hamas will never be a partner because Hamas is an ideology that created a leadership or a political leadership, but they cannot give up on their ideology. So, since policy is designed by our political leadership, so that's it.
Yeah.
And kind of a dripping down, yes, they were wrong as well by accepting the idea that, okay, Hamas is the third on 3 levels.
Yeah. Efraim, your sense?
I'd like to approach the subject from an intelligence professional aspect and find out together with you whether we can try and identify why did we have this intelligence failure. It was the second failure in 50 years.
Yes.
We had a failure in the Yom Kippur War of a different nature. Now we had a second intelligence failure. Why did we have such a failure, and how did this come about? First of all, did we know what was going on? Did we know that there were preparations? Well, there are those who did know that there were preparations, and those were the girl soldiers who were serving in positions along the border with the Gaza Strip, who were observing what was happening on the other side, and were reporting in the last few months before the war incessantly to their superiors. And they were reporting what we call human from their point of view, not from sources, but from observation,
Right.
which is part of the tools of intelligence. It reached the point when they were, several of them were threatened with court-martials for trying to cause trouble by these reports. Some of those who reported are now in Hamas hands. Others were killed on the day of the 7th of October. And the fact of the matter is that there was information, direct information, visual information that was disregarded. Not only was it disregarded, but as I think Ami mentioned, a day before the attack, a unit was transferred from the south into the West Bank, because that was where the priority was. And that was also probably the result of the current composition of the government, where we have a very strong party there, a couple of parties who are extreme right and who want to annex the West Bank into Israel. And that is where the center of attention was. And the result was that when the Hamas actually attacked, there was almost nobody there to oppose them and nobody to contend with them. That's one aspect of this. The second aspect is that over the last few years, we have more and more become involved in technological intelligence, the use of technological capabilities, both VISINT and other areas, in which we are able to use the technology as a substitute for human intelligence. But I think that this particular war has shown that there is no substitute for human intelligence. And when we did succeed and we had successes, it was usually human intelligence which brought the information. We had a war with the Syrians in 2006, and in the first 48 hours of that war, Israel was able to destroy all the Iranian long-range missiles which were placed on the northern borders of Syria and Lebanon. And the way we were able to do this was the result of human intelligence, of information that we were able to glean from sources, or in one case, one important source. And very often it is that one important source who is important. But the preponderance of technology and the idea that AI and all kinds of other fancy words can be the substitute, I think, has now been utterly disproved. The second thing I want to say is that it's quite obvious that the Hamas was observing what was happening in Israel. And it is impossible to ignore what was happening in Israel in the months before the war broke out. There was a major crisis in Israel. There was a constitutional crisis in Israel. There was an effort by the prime minister to change the constitution concerning the balances between the judicial and the other branches of government. It caused massive demonstrations in the streets of Israel for over 33 weeks. It was a major event in the history of the country. It looking at it from the outside, it looked as if Israel was more or less bringing the internal system of Israel into a final and ultimate crisis, which could even lead to civil war. I remind you that there was a very, very severe reaction in the armed forces at the time. Officers refused to come to train on weekly training. Many of the pilots who had to do training once or twice a week refused to come to do their training. And if you were looking at the situation in Israel from the outside, one would assume that Israel is really in the midst of a crisis which shows enormous weakness from every point of view. So from that point of view, I believe that they were following the scene, and they chose exactly the right moment when to act, when there was hardly any force in the south to confront them, when Israel was in the throes of a constitutional crisis, when there were serious problems in relationship inside the countries between the growing ultra-religious bloc in the country, which had demands. It was a country in which we were suffering, I think, from a lack of internal, not only cohesion, but also having some kind of a dialogue in parliament. For instance, the parliamentarians were of a very low level, in my opinion. We now have a government of, I don't know, I can't even count the number of ministers there are. And I cannot say how many of them are really capable of being ministers.
Yes.
It is also a situation which we have never seen before. And I think the Hamas saw what was going on and decided that this was their opportunity to deal Israel a very, very heavy and a very, very serious blow.
To both,
Did it almost to perfection.
to both of you, I mean, what you're describing, each of you in your own way, is a galactic failure, which in many respects, since it involves civilian deaths, goes beyond the failure in 1973. This was a failure to judge Hamas's intentions, a failure to realistically understand its capabilities. It occurred at a time when Israel was sending signals that it was interested in acquiescing in Hamas's governance of Gaza. I interviewed Shikaki a month or so ago, and he basically said very much the same thing. He made the point that Avi made on hardware and software, which was another flawed sort of assessment on the part of Israel. I mean, there will be a state commission of inquiry at some point, as there was in the wake of 73. Do each of you believe that in 73, it was the intelligence and security officials that were identified? The mayor resigned under public pressure, but in your view, I know this is a political question, but I want to ask it. Do you believe there will be a call for accountability for what's occurred on the political level? Ami?
Well, if I believe, yes, I believe. If I know, I don't. So really, but I want to add something to what Efraim said, and I think it's what he said was very important. First of all, I didn't mention the way I understand, human behavior or human understanding. We understand reality through lanes of axioms and paradigms. Now, this is exactly what we saw during Yom Kippur. This is exactly what we saw now. Today we understand. We had all the facts. Efraim mentioned it. The women that, were responsible on the visit, they saw everything. They reported everything. Their officers, men and women, they produced reports. They described exactly the whole scenario. And we could see it in Azadin al-Qassam websites. As they are telling us exactly, they show us how they train, the names of the keyboard, everything. But we didn't understand it because it was against the paradigm. So every time when we saw the details, we said, okay, in Yom Kippur, we said it's an exercise. And today we said, okay, they are training for the last 10 years. So, okay. Second, why now? I want to add something because today we understand it. I didn't understand it before, but the new Middle East presented by Biden several weeks before, from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean, without Palestinians. Palestinians were not mentioned. Now, if you ask me the way I understand Palestinians, we do not see, first of all, that they see themselves as a people, a nation, and second, they feel alone. They feel abandoned. They felt that they were abandoned by all the Arab states who signed peace with us without doing anything about it. And now America, with the state that founded the Arab Peace Initiative, they are going to give up on the holy places in Jerusalem and on Palestinian state. This is exactly what they felt. And they could not. I mean, I spoke with Halil, you mentioned him, 1 week later. And he said, Ami, you do not understand. They choose Samson option because they felt that they have nothing to lose. And this is the only way for them to show to the world, you will not be able to create stability in this region if you will bypass Palestinians. No more. And the tragedy is that they succeeded. Today, even America and all the states, all the Arab states around us, understand if we want to achieve stability, if we want to face Iran today with the support of China, Russia, whatever, Syria, we have to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because it became a regional factor and almost shape the regional stability and even influence on the global rivalry between China and America, because they meet now in the Middle East. China will not be able to give up on the Middle East. The energy comes from the Persian Gulf. China is here investing a huge amount of money in Israel. So yes, we have, it's today is a totally different regional, global, and of course, Israeli-Palestinian reality.
Let me ask you about Hamas and I guess what you consider to be the organizational imperative. I mean, Hamas is not the Palestinian Authority. Clearly, in many respects, it has more legitimacy and more authority. I mean, if Israel wants prisoners exchanged, it goes to Hamas. If Israel wants a ceasefire, it goes to Hamas. Bezalel Smotrich was quoted as saying that Hamas is an asset and the Palestinian Authority is a liability. But in undertaking this attack and in demonstrating a level of savagery, brutality, indiscriminate killing, and sexual predation, what was Hamas's motivation? To inflict a level of pain on Israeli civilians and soldiers that they had never experienced before? Did they imagine Israel's response? And was there a calculation on the part of Yahya Sinwar or Mohammed Deif or Marwan Issa, the leaders, planners of this, that there would be a achievable objective, or was this simply a cosmic roll of the dice and come what may, they didn't care? It's hard to read to know what Hamas was thinking, but they must have anticipated Israel's response. A trap to lure it into Gaza? Help us unpack this. Efraim, any thoughts on Yahya Sinwar's calculation? He knew Israel well, fluent in Hebrew. He served time in Israeli prisons. How do you read what they wanted to achieve?
Can I refer to this? I think it's very difficult to get into the minds of the Hamas leadership. The Hamas leadership is not one solid block. There are different aspects of the Hamas leadership. First of all, let's remember that the Hamas most senior officials are in Qatar, in Doha. The leader of the Hamas sits in Doha. Khaled Mashal, who is a key figure, lives in Doha. And I think that probably when you ask about Hamas, there are more shades in Hamas than one can imagine. I think they misjudged the reaction of Israel. I think they did not believe that Israel would act the way it did. I think in this respect, probably the decision which was taken to carry out this maneuver, as it's called, inside the territory, which is now in the midst of its being exercised. We don't see the end yet to the maneuver, and we are still fighting both in the north and in the south of the Strip. There's fighting going on even today, very fierce fighting in the north, sometimes more than in the south. And I think it is too early to reach a judgment of how this is going to look at the end of the war, whenever the end comes. But I'm more concerned, I will tell you, about the lack in Israel of serious thought of what to do in the future, how to handle this situation in the future. What do we wish to happen in Gaza? Do we wish to Hamas to be the leadership in Gaza? No. Do we want Hamas to be a partner in the West Bank? No. Do we want to take responsibility for the 2 million people in Gaza? No. So what is our plan? And I think that one of the things which we lack today, and which the population in Israel is totally oblivious to, is that the government, or the head of the government, or the prime minister, whoever you like to wish, have not made clear to the people what our aim is now that we went to war. After all, in the end, if you go to war, you have to state the aim. What is your aim? And when we began this war, Mr. Netanyahu said that the aim was to destroy Hamas entirely, to bring about a situation in which Hamas no longer exists. And he even said that even if it will take years to do this, years, we will chase them all over the place. And he mentioned Turkey, and he mentioned some other country. And of course, Erdogan immediately got excited about this. Suddenly, Israel was going to act on Turkish territory. I think with a slip of the tongue, but that's not the only slip of the tongue that Netanyahu has made in recent months. But in the end, when you come to the IDF and you say to the IDF, you have to tell the IDF, you're on the political level, what is the aim of the operation? What is the end game operation here? This has not been revealed to the Israeli public, who are oblivious and do not know what the aim is. And what's more, I suspect that the Prime Minister himself hasn't worked out with himself what the aim of this is going to be in the end.
Yeah.
Because for him, there are many aspects to this. There are personal aspects. There are the questions of his legal problems, which he has in Israel, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And I think in this respect, one of the things which I think I remember Churchill famously in World War II, when he was addressing the nation twice a month. I was then a young boy and listening with my father to his speeches at 9 o'clock at night, once or twice per month. He always used to tell the population and tell the people of Britain what was the current situation and where are we going? What are our aims? What do we intend to achieve? And this is totally absent.
It is.
Secondly, and that is something I want to say, that instead of trying to, shall we say, strengthen the confidence of Israel in the government, his appearances in public on the television are, I think, from a point of view of encouraging the public, have the exact opposite effect.
Right.
Because it's always he never speaks on time. Every time he says, I'm going to speak at 8 o'clock, and he speaks at 9. And when he comes on, you see how nervous he is and how distraught he is. And that is a matter on which I have no medical possibility to judge, but right. I'm very concerned about that.
I do want to talk about the day after, but I don't want to leave this notion of Hamas's motives, because I think it's extremely important. Okay. And a reading or misreading of that, I think is operationally very significant. So, Ami, on Hamas's objectives, other than the broad brush themes that you've made on what Hamas wanted to achieve on the macro level, what about the operation itself, the taking of hostages, the trading of hostages? Does Sinwar believe he can survive this That's my question too.
It's Aaron, it's a great question, and we are friends, so I don't want to offend you. But you are asking a rational question when you know that this is not a rational organization. I just told you, it's Halil Shkaki.
Mm.
He said what Hamas did is to choose a Samson option. Now, Samson, when he decided to do what he did, what did he want? It was totally rational and totally irrational. This is exactly the point. If you face an enemy who feels that he has nothing to lose, this is the most dangerous enemy because he has nothing to lose. So I am not psychologist. I'm not sure I totally understand, but I think that one of the scenarios, we have too many, chaos agents in Israel. I hear in the television. Some of them used to be my friends, and they explain me and us and all of us that our goal, not military, our political goal, should be to create a human disaster in Gaza. Because from the chaos, we shall start again. And I can tell you, David, Aaron, that this is exactly the theory of the most radical, fundamental Muslim organizations. This is exactly the theology and the strategy of ISIS and of Al-Qaeda. From the chaos, we shall survive. And I'm afraid that what Efraim rightly said, all of us who studied something in any university understand that you cannot send youngsters to war without defining a political goal. A military goal is never the end goal. Military is a tool. War is not the objective. And political goal and the essence of victory. Victory is never measured in military terms. So when we say the day after, we are trying to define the concept, the idea of victory. And we are not doing it. It's a huge failure. Because whatever will be the military goals. By the way, you asked about the military goals, they are achievable. But I think that, Israel politicians will not be able to give our military to the IDF the necessary time in order to achieve it. And the military asks every week, do we have the time? All the military commanders, they are saying every day we need at least 2 months. And all of us know that we do not have 2 months because we see the instability in Jordan. We see the behavior of the street, not the administration, the street in Amman, in Damascus, in everywhere. We see, the way we are perceived in the world. And we see American politics. So we understand that we shall not have the time. If you ask me, we shall not achieve the military goals that the IDF can and is trying to achieve. We shall not have any picture of victory if this nonsense still exists. And I'm afraid that we shall have to redesign all what we are trying to achieve. And all what I expect is that since today it is not a wishful thinking of me and some other lunatics in Israel who really believe that two states can be the future reality, even if it will take 10 or 20 years, because it became a global issue. It's crazy to think that the only thing that all the global players agree is on the concept of two states. America, Europe, Russia, China, all the Arab Peace Initiative, all of them understand. So until today, it didn't matter because Palestinians did not exist. But now, when it is a regional conflict and will create instability everywhere in the Middle East, and even will influence on, I don't know, energy prices and the confrontation between China and America. I really hope that someone will put it on the table and will tell us exactly what is good for him and what is good for us. I do not give any present to anybody. This is the only way for Israel to be safer without losing our identity as a Jewish democratic state.
No, I agree with you. It's, as you know better than anyone, sound policy is going to increasingly conflict with what various leaders consider to be sound politics. And as you know, and I agree with you, the IDF's operational clock is months. It's beyond months, actually. It's probably most of next year. Not at this kind of intensity, but certainly operationally operating in Gaza. The administration's clock is weeks, if not a couple months, before this becomes an issue that may threaten the president's reelection prospects. If this drags into April and May at this sort of intensity, in addition to Ukraine, so we have a few minutes left. I wanted to talk to you about the so-called day after. I wonder if you could give me your thought on what you believe is magical thinking as opposed to what might be more realistic thinking about the future of Gaza. There's a lot of magical thinking going on right now, fantasies. So, Efraim, let me start with you. Just a couple points on elements of what would be a rational and feasible end state for Gaza, tied to the West Bank, obviously, in terms of a political solution at some point. But for the next year or so, what do you think?
You've posed a question which I find it very difficult to answer, because a lot will depend on actors who are still on the scene, and we don't know if they'll be there at the end of this war. Will Sinwar survive? Will Hania stay in power in Doha? There are so many unknowns here, which will be very important. There'll also be the game that Qatar is playing. And I'd like to say something about Qatar because it's important. I remind you that Qatar played a very key role when President Biden in his first few months had to contend with the departure from Afghanistan. And he came to the Qataris, and the Qataris were his, shall we say, tool in order to effect a somehow an orderly departure from Afghanistan. The Qataris are very clever people, but let's not forget the number of real Qatari citizens is something between 300,000 and 400,000. The fact that they have shall we say, a chest of money which is always being replenished almost endlessly, is money. It's a lot of money. It's also oil, and you also have the Fifth Fleet, I think, which has a big base in Qatar, and not only in Qatar but also in Bahrain. So there's so many things which could happen here, and I cannot give you a recipe. What I'll say is this, though. I think that in the end, if we are sincere with ourselves, and if we sit down and we say, what would we like to happen? I think it would be important to have a methodology of discrete discussions with the Jordanians and the Egyptians to find out how we can work together in a triangle of jointly handling the Gaza situation to the satisfaction of the international community and the countries in the region. I also think, by the way, and I have reason to believe that because I was in Washington a couple of weeks ago and spoke to a number of people, I think that ultimately, notwithstanding what is happening, the Saudis have not departed from their wish to reach an understanding with Israel, which might even lead to diplomatic relations at some stage in the future.
I think that
we have certain assets which we could properly use if we behave properly.
Right.
If we behave properly, if we act properly, and if to some extent we here and there show, let's say, a strike of humility, which is always useful in times of distress.
Indeed, it is. Ami, the last word to you.
I
On
think
Gaza and Gaza's future for the next year or so.
okay. I want to be very, very honest, and I feel like Efraim. First of all, I don't know, but my assumption is, or the way I see what should be done when all our predictions collapsed, and our ability to describe scenarios and probabilities does not exist. I think that we have to start somewhere else. We have to say exactly what we want, not today, 40 years from now, and then reverse engineering to go backward. Now, I know where I want to go. I want to see in 40 years from now, not in my generation, it's okay, but for my children and grandchildren. I want them to live in a reality of two states, side by side. And now the question is, okay, how can we go there? And first of all, I know all the mistakes that we did in Oslo. And I can tell you all the mistakes that you Americans did in Oslo, and our Palestinian partners, etc. We have to carefully learn these lessons. Second, we have to understand that in parallel to the war in the battlefield, we are fighting a war of ideas. And it is much more important to win the war of ideas. Hamas is an ideology, and you cannot destroy ideology by the use of military power. The only way to destroy Hamas' fundamental radical ideology is to confront it with a different ideology. And I know the Palestinians' dreams. If you will create a viable reality, a viable future, not today, when people will believe that this road brings them to this future, they will change their ideology. I'm not speaking about the less than 20% of Palestinians who believe in Hamas theology. 70-80% of the Palestinians, all what they want is a better political horizon. They see themselves as a people. They want independence, and etc., etc. I think that it is very realistic, because since I know that on the battlefield, we shall not achieve all our goals, we have to understand that finally it is not a disaster. Because if we shall win the war of ideas, it will shape the reality probably more than what we do on the battlefield, that from time to time, even bring more Palestinians to hate us and to choose terror. So I think that this is what we have to do. First, it will be a very long interim stage. We have to make sure that it will not be perceived by the people in the region as another crusade. We shall not say we don't have to send Americans or Europeans. The forces that will keep the order and will rebuild Gaza, they will gain the support of the people. All of them should speak Arabic. And within the context of two states, I believe that we shall able to recruit Jordan, Egypt, probably Morocco, Emirates. The money will come from Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, supported and led by America and Europe. I think that this is what we can do, and this is what we should do.
I think Gaza first cannot be Gaza only, and it must be tethered to the sort of political horizon that you're talking about. Whether or not the international community, my own government, has the will and skill in order to accomplish this is another matter. But I want to thank both of you for your integrity, your honesty, and above all, your clarity, because we need clarity and we need a strategy. Ami Ayalon, Efraim Halevy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your authority, and your expertise. I know I've learned a great deal, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. Thank you again. Efraim, Ami, thank you.
All the best.
To you.
Thank you, Efraim. And of course, Aaron, for inviting us.
Thank you, Ami.
All the best.